After finishing Marvel's Spider-Man 2018, I was prepared to be waiting for at least another 4 years for the next Spider-Man title. But to my surprise, in 2020 we got another Spider-Man game, Miles Morales. When it was first revealed, I was a little skeptical about how much content would be included since the last game was only 2 years prior. Nevertheless, once I got my hands on the game and started playing as Miles, it was clear that this is more than just a glorified DLC. At its core, the gameplay mirrors Spider-Man 2018, but it's been tweaked some to make it different than before. Of course, you're still beating up and throwing around all sorts of bad guys, but this time you have a couple new options at your disposal. To nobody's surprise, you're able to utilize Miles' bioelectric powers and channel them into a couple of different moves. These vary based on the button combinations you press, but all of them serve a purpose. By holding L1 and then pressing one of the action buttons, you're able to do something called a Venom move. Ironically enough, these don't resemble anything from the Venom we see in Spider-Man 2. They're just called Venom powers, which was a weird name choice. Anyways, the easiest to perform is the punch or throw by pressing L1 in either square or triangle. These didn't require much Venom charge and worked against almost any enemy. One thing I liked about the punch in particular is how you can aim it at one enemy, but when you execute the move, your punch may hit multiple enemies depending on how close they're huddled together. The throw is useful for trying to get someone out the way, but it's the move that I use the least. This leaves the other two moves, which are a top-down slam and a sort of ultimate attack. In my opinion, these moves are OP, as you can clear out a bunch of enemies in just one blast. I couldn't tell you the amount of times I was surrounded by both big and small types of henchmen, only to use a slam and knock all of them down. The Mega Charge attack uses up all your Venom charges and has you release a giant static shock across a huge chunk of the area. Obviously this is the best attack, but since it uses up so many of the charges, you would think you weren't going to be able to use it much. However, for me it was actually the opposite. Just like in 2018, you have a skill tree where you can purchase upgrades. One of the final upgrades you can acquire lets you release one of the Mega Blasts right when you're about to be dealt a critical blow, assuming you have enough charges. And since the charges refill pretty fast, it's actually really hard to die, because you can use these blasts over and over. These Venom attacks makes Miles truly stand on his own in comparison to Peter. Even playing on Ultimate, this game really isn't much of a challenge, similar to 2018, and much of that is thanks to the Venom attacks. If you played Spider-Man 2018, then you can imagine how this game is structured. It's literally set up exactly the same, but the side activities are different than before. Obviously. When not going through the main missions, you can do combat challenges, find underground caches, collect postcards, and some other stuff. If you didn't like the side content from before, then you probably won't like it in this. However, if you enjoyed the extra activities, then you're going to have a blast with these, because these are just as fun, if not more, than last time. One thing I've always appreciated with these games is how the activities have some story elements. A lot of times the side activities in games are just a bunch of filler that's literally meant to pad the game and lack anything important. But that's never the case with Insomniac's Spider-Man games, as they always have a little bit of story or background info that make them worth playing through. When it comes to the missions, it's exactly as you would expect. A good balance of action with enough slow moments to help you gain a deeper understanding of each character. There's plenty of fighting, but I thought that this title had more emphasis on puzzle solving than before. Many times you have to link things together with electricity or move things in place in order to progress. Of course there were puzzles before, but a lot of those were inside skippable side content. Although this time around I liked how it was introduced as part of each mission, making the entire structure flow naturally and not feel forced. Too many times we've played games where puzzles pop up at the worst times, or there's too many of them in general, but that was never the case with Miles Morales. These missions were just right in regards to balance, as there was enough fighting mixed in with puzzle solving to keep the pacing at a good level. What surprised me was the depth of the side missions. These were longer than you might expect and provide some semi-substantial content. They're nothing over the top, as they're side missions so you shouldn't expect them to be, but even still, they did a good job at keeping me occupied in between the story moments. Unfortunately, the game does force you to complete some side stuff before being able to progress to the next story bit. I guess in hindsight it makes sense because the devs don't want you flying through the game, but thankfully you only have to do one of these activities before you're able to progress. I'm not sure if this is the case for everyone across the board, but for me, every time I hit one of these moments, I only had to complete one of them. So technically it did get a little bit better. Earlier I mentioned upgrades, and I liked how these are all the same, but different. Since Miles leans into the technology a little bit more, you have visor upgrades along with suit upgrades that add another layer to the combat. These are similar to before, as they add additional benefits like more ammo for your gadgets, resistance against certain weapons, etc. Getting these is easy as you can earn them just by doing all the activities that I mentioned before. All of these are helpful, but which ones you choose alter your specific version of Miles enough to make a meaningful difference in the actual gameplay. These upgrades never get old, honestly. Speaking of gadgets, this is the one area that I thought lacked compared to 2018. First off, you don't have as many of them, and that limits all the possibilities when it comes to combat. They all are effective, but for some reason they don't hit the same. If there was one that I would say is the best overall, it would be the gravity well. Throw it in the middle of a group of enemies and they'll all be forced into each other, knocking entire groups down. A close second would be the proximity mines, as the electricity that they give off is clutch during the stealth segments. Place it onto one of the plates located around certain rooms and you can take down multiple enemies with just one mine. These gadgets are still fun to use, but since there isn't as many, you might not gravitate towards them like you did before. Just a second ago I mentioned the stealth combat, and that's almost exactly the same, because you're still Spider-Man. What I thought was cool this time around was how you could use the gadgets to take out enemies without getting spotted. Just like the mines, you can use the environment to your advantage and place stuff down to take enemies out quietly. Take it a step further, and Miles' ability to camouflage makes it really hard to get spotted. The camouflage bar feels faster than the venom charges and makes the stealth areas a breeze. Even if you're terrible at Spider-Man games, you could use the camo and run through a lot of the combat encounters. It really is that clutch. In case you were wondering, you can use the camo to sort of re-hide even if you were detected. Camouflage is such a great addition to the game, and it's just another mechanic that makes Miles stand on his own compared to Peter. I wasn't expecting much in this area, but I thought Miles' suits could have been a bit better. Of course he doesn't have as much as Peter, but after trying out all his suits, there was just something off about him. The main ones I used were the Bodega Cat suit, the Into the Spider-Verse suit, and his suit from the start of the game. It could be because he doesn't have a lot of cool suits in the comics, but Peter's suits are 1,000 times better than Miles. Even still, I appreciated the fact that Insomniac gave us enough of them to pick from so we're not stuck wearing the same ones over and over. The gameplay for Miles Morales is similar to 2018, but has enough elements to set it apart from before. The activities included align with what you would expect out of a Spider-Man game, but have been tailored specifically for Miles. To put it simply, if you like 2018's gameplay, you'll like this just as much, if not more. The story for Miles Morales is better than I was expecting. For a game with such a small cast of characters, it's easy to discern the differences between them, and none of them feel like copies of each other. What surprised me is how the writers were able to introduce new characters and flesh them out enough in such a short time span. The thing that makes this more impressive is that there isn't a slew of villains to use either, making it a necessity to make each character at least semi-memorable. Pacing wise, I thought this game did a solid job at keeping things moving while slowly telling the story. Even if you know the characters from the comics, you might not be able to predict where the plot leads by the end of the game. The inclusion of familiar characters alongside the introduction of new ones really helped to create a universe that feels interconnected. When initially starting the story and finding out that Peter really wouldn't be in it, you might be a little skeptical. And honestly, I wouldn't blame you, because after the last game I was unsure if playing an entire game as Miles would work, but it actually did. Over the course of this short story, you see Miles grow up so much and truly understand what it means to be Spider-Man. It felt as if this game was the natural progression of the character that you would come to expect, considering he just got his powers at the end of the last game. Even still, what Miles goes through feels somewhat realistic, as the problems he faces all scale in importance. From saving the city to restoring power to the apartment, everything he does fits perfectly. The main flaw with this story is simply the length. It's definitely not rushed, but another couple hours would have been nice to slow the game down some. Right from the intro with Peter, the game just flies. You start the first mission, and then before you know it, you're hit with the no point of return screen. Because of this, I suggest you take in each scene for what it is. If this story was just a bit longer, whether it be important plot points or not, then I think it could have been even better. Unfortunately, the villain isn't really the best. I won't say who it is, but compared to Peter's villains, this person just doesn't compare. I don't mean that they're bad, but if you're like me, you're probably not going to find them interesting. Like seeing who that person is and how they operate versus all the abilities Miles has, it's like, what are we doing, bro? Because they don't stand a chance. Yeah, this villain is in the comics, but from my understanding, this depiction of them isn't like that. I could be wrong, but either way, this villain was lacking to say the least. Nonetheless, the story for Miles Morales is short, but engaging enough to hold your interest. The introduction of new characters meshed with returning characters helped make New York feel connected. If you were worried about the story not being as good as 2018, in my opinion, it's not. But this is still worth going through, simply for the fact that it's a Spider-Man story where you don't play as Peter. Overall, Spider-Man Miles Morales is a good game with little flaws. The story isn't as good as its predecessor, but for a sort of side game that isn't a full-fledged sequel, this is as good as it gets. The gameplay is tweaked a little bit to make it unique from before, but still has all the elements that made the original game as good as it was. For those reasons, I'm going to give this game an 8.5. Miles is a great Spider-Man, and it was nice to go through his story that was custom to him. I'd say if his villains were better and the story was a little longer, then this game could have been really good. Regardless, I highly recommend this, and if you're a Spider-Man fan, you'll be sure to enjoy this. What did you think of Spider-Man Miles Morales? Did you like this more than 2018? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to check out one of my other Spider-Man reviews right here.